Welcome to Property Quorum. Now, we've had a slight temporary change of personnel, but to replace adequately, more than adequately, superbly, is Michelle Carr for Juliette Babula, who's currently flying across the Atlantic. I'm not sure. But of course, we have the stalwarts of Property Quorum. That's Hamish McClay of Search Convey, Chris Gilson of Root Home. Michelle Carr, of course, is the construction alchemy, the guardian angel of construction. I almost forgot. It's a proper nom de plume. And today's topic, as usual, is a good one. Can we fix the foundations of UK construction? So I've got my eye on you, Michelle. But first of all, as is traditional on this channel, Hamish McClay, would you take us away?
A good thing indeed that we have Michelle joining us today. We spoke last week of a scenario that is happening, and it isn't just a new thing. It's a challenge that has been happening within the building industry over time, but it's something we're made more aware of. I think probably because of the challenges that this new government, and they're rightly trying to resolve a situation by building adequate housing, if that's ever possible. But they are making some efforts. However, what we have found, or what we did conclude, there was a big challenge. The builders themselves don't seem to be in the best position to be able to make things better or create that element of trust that people would like to actually sort of see in what they are themselves building. But there are ways of actually sort of getting that trust back, because it's not every property that's actually sort of falling apart. It's not every property where corners have been cut. However, it does depend on the vigilance of certain people to actually sort of pull the whole thing together. And of course, there's also the attitude of the people who are putting it together. But there are ways forward. And both Chris obviously is relying on this because he has work being done on the properties that he works with to make housing available to more and more people. But of course, Michelle's in one of those great positions, I think, that she's the sort of person that can actually give us it's quite interesting. It just came to actually, she's taking the con out of construction, but she's putting the confidence back into construction at the same time.
That's a lovely thing. Better than anyone I could think of. That's very good. Michelle, is there any hope for it all? Given that construction is in a bit of a pickle at the moment.
Oh, construction's been in a pickle for the whole of my entire career, and probably way before that. I think those things are definitely changing. Attitudes are changing, education is changing. People just aren't accepting the norm anymore. I think there's a lot of sort of breaking away from what's been going on for the last 20 years as being acceptable. So I think people thinking, actually, I'm not cool with this. I don't like the way this has been done. And I think people are actually thinking for themselves a bit more. Not everyone. We still have a lot of the population that's still lemmings, in my opinion. But there's a lot of people that are thinking, a lot of people are more self-employed these days, for example. There's a lot of people that think outside the box. And there is a change. Whether or not the government's going to help anything, I don't think they will. My concern with what the government is doing is actually whether or not there's going to be any affordability for any of these new properties. There doesn't seem to be any cap on what the construction companies can do. The big tier ones, the big companies, not all of them. Some of them are still screwing subcontractors, not having decent payment terms, etc., etc. And again, it comes down to the professionals that you have and the team that you're purchasing from. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But there's definitely been a shift, and people are really interested. Obviously, that's what I've based my entire company on, is protecting people commercially and making sure they don't get ripped off and screwed over and get a decent job for their money. And that's basically what both of my businesses are about. And a lot of people are very interested in that, and educating is key. But again, getting the right professionals, etc., is always going to be the way forward anyway.
Well, I guess that's a bit of apathy mixed with a slight bit of hope, which is great. Always good for a Thursday morning. Chris, you're at the sharp end of it. I mean, can you see any positive movement yourself?
On a political level, not so much. I think that the industry's definitely been hammered, certainly over the last decade or so, with escalating costs, with people being pushed out of the industry, with schemes not being the apprenticeship schemes that they have now are nothing like what they had many moons ago, which is sad, and it's kind of coming around to some extent. But yeah, I'm not as hopeful as some of our panel. I think that one of the challenges that I see is that we have these big tier 1 contractors that have been really taking the mick for quite a while and making hay while the sun shines. And yeah, for people who are trying to do it properly, it kind of really just it's a lemon in people's eye, and it's quite frustrating. And when you do try and do it properly, the level of expectation and the level of regulation that you have to adhere to and getting everything correct, it's very challenging. So yeah, I'm struggling with where we're up to at this point in time, with the government trying to throw additional regulation and additional challenges at the doorsteps of certainly the smaller scale developers. Yeah, so I don't know.
Michelle, in some of the discussions you and I have had, it seems like that if perhaps small holders may well be pushed out of the ability to even become to have their own lets, it's going to become too onerous to do so. Do you think that, in fact, the rental market will end up being held in the hands of 4 or 5 large conglomerates?
Potentially. I mean, but I don't know whether that's necessarily a bad thing, because there's a lot of Europe do things like that. A lot of places where they don't buy, they just rent. Rental is much more common than buying property. I mean, ultimately, when you're buying a property, you own a property, the person that you end up paying an absolute fortune for it, because the only people that win out of that are the banks, because you pay 3 times or whatever it may be over the length of time. And people go, well, renting is throwing money away. But actually, I think renting potentially is better, because you're probably going to be putting money in an individual's pocket, rather than if you buy something, it's only the bank that wins. And I mean, have had this conversation myself, because I've been looking at potentially selling and buying something new and releasing something equity from my own property. And actually, the way the market is at the moment, it might be better to rent for a little while. I don't know. But I mean, ultimately, I do think that there are issues. And I think if the government really wants to change the industry and really wants to make a massive difference to this country, they need to make harsher terms on the big boys, the contractors that are making ridiculous amount of money, that are screwing other people over. Yeah, you've got the Construction Act, but there isn't really much support for contractors that don't understand the Construction Act. They don't understand the JCT contracts. And the fact that all these big contracts big contractors and solicitors are basically taking the JCT out of the JCT contract. They're amending everything so that you don't have the right payment terms. You don't have all the terms that the whole ethos of the Construction Act was written in the first place. So unless we can get some penalties on, or something that stops these contractors or the big contractors from either doing shoddy work or just making house prices ridiculously high, which then brings the house prices of the whole entire area up as well, just to make their profits, when the country's in the state that it's in. I just don't think it's right. Unless the government are going to do something like that, adding more regulations, which the big companies can get around all the time. They always do. They'll find somebody private to sign a form that they want them to sign. They always get around it. And some of the things that I've seen are just absolutely unbelievable that have been signed off. People are living in these properties the way that they've been built. But until there are some real sort of penalties and the government step in to protect people from these big contractors on the £1 million, multi-million pound, billion corporations, then I don't know what else there is. I don't think the government input is really helping in any other way, except potentially just filling the pockets of their friends.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Well, go on, Chris.
So
leave it there.
No, I think that's a really good point in the context that there's probably only one piece of legislation on the statute books that does actually have that level of bite in it. And
yes, I was going to ask about this actually.
It's the General Data Protection Regulations, was 2015, then repealed and amended by the 2018. And I think the penalty for a breach of data protection regulations is a fixed amount or 10% of the company's annual revenue, whichever is higher. Now, I don't think the ICO have actually applied that on the sorts of levels that they could do, but that is a terrifying potential penalty. You've got organizations like Google and all these big multi-billion-dollar transnational businesses that will just take the fine. They don't give a shit. They'll be like, oh, well, we'll just do it anyway and pay the fine later. We don't care. We'll just do it. And it happens all the time. Now, if you had a piece of legislation like that, they would think twice about it. And if it was actually wielded properly by the regulators, they'd be scared of it. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that could bring these big organizations to heel. And it is the big organizations that really do take the mick more than anyone else.
Hamish, it seems to me that in a world of shifting sands, you need regulations that have teeth. And yet it seems that, as Chris has pointed out, and Michelle, that the status quo will continue because the teeth that there are blunted at best.
I don't think that's entirely. I think really we're fortunate to have Michelle with us, because Michelle is really at the heart of a lot of what goes on. She's actually sort of not so much on the shop floor, but on the sort of the floor before it's even sort of built in many sort of respects. So she can see clearly what's actually sort of going on. And it is an attitude, it is a shift in the attitude in the minds of some people. It hasn't applied to everybody yet, but it does need that regulation to push it over. I mean, strangely, we have this situation. The Building Safety Act brought about it. So anything that happens tends to have some kind of a consequence. And very often people will look at consequences and they're trying to achieve something. They don't realize what else is happening in another direction. Now, as a consequence of the Building Safety Act, it was considered to be important that regulation was adhered to within the build program. And certain things were introduced, particularly with the building safety regulator. All of a sudden, they're saying, well, actually, it's taking too long for some of these things to get through the building regulator. Why don't we start cutting corners again? We're trying to fight back against the very, very thing that would give, instead of trying to support the building regulator by getting the information right in the first place, they're blaming the building safety regulator for them not getting the adequate information together. So there's much that they could do. Again, we're to a situation, this is what I wanted, after last week's devastation of saying, well, there's no chance because the builders just aren't going to do it. I do think there is some positive. But it's not all the doom and gloom that we had spoken about last week. However, we want the shift to be a darn sight quicker than it is.
Michelle, do you share Hamish's optimism?
I mean, nothing happens quickly in the construction industry, so I'm not sure how quick anything's going to happen, to be fair, Hamish. But I do think that the seeds are being sown. I do think that we are getting to a point that we do want to hold people accountable. We do want to stand up for our rights. We do want to stand up for what's right, what's change. We're not sort of just blindly plodding along anymore. Well, there's a number of us that aren't. Some still are, but I do think there is a positive shift. I mean, I'm biased because obviously I'm really, really going forward for Helen Leather to try and make this shift myself, and changing one construction company at a time, and just increasing awareness, education, and empowering people to understand what their rights are. So maybe that's the fact that I am a little bit more optimistic, because the people in my world are getting a benefit from it. They are changing, they are receiving the money they're supposed to be getting paid, they are understanding the industry, what they need to do. So I suppose I'm maybe a slightly biased opinion, because I can see the changes that I'm making myself. But yeah, that's going to take a while to have a ripple effect. But I do think there is a shift and people are open to it.
I don't want to do a bit of whataboutism, but Chris, if there were changes made, how would that positively affect the portion of the industry where you're at? Because if Michelle's at the coal face, you're certainly the one stacking the coal and using it to light the fires.
I know we're doing it properly already. We've hired Michelle as part of our team. So.
Okay, and that is yeah. But she's the one waving she's the one running ahead of the vehicles with the red flag. I'm not. I mean, she's not sure there's anything she can do about the actual construction act itself. All she can do is point out what needs to be done.
Yeah, the challenge is that there's always going to be increasing regulation, changing regulation, and as any business that operates in those areas that are impacted by it, you need to stay ahead of it. You need to see how it's going to impact your operations. Chances are it's probably going to have an impact on cost, and it's how much of that cost you can absorb, and it's how much of that cost you can get away with, I guess, to pass on to your clients. So they're the ultimate person who's paying the bill for any increase in regulation. I'm sorry to say, it's just another hidden tax.
Wow. All right. Well, okay. Michelle, I know that you and I have spoken long and hard about the Construction Act, about what it is to have a contract and things like that. By the way, shameless plug, we're dropping the next version of Taking the Con Out of Construction, and I will be promoting it fairly heavily later on today. But is there something that can be done short term for people to make sure that they're on the right side of this thing?
Well, ultimately, it's the same thing that I think we discuss every time I'm on here. It's about employing the right professionals. And ultimately, you either have to find out the information yourself and educate yourself, or you need to employ someone that is already educated that can support you and advise you accordingly. I mean, that's the being and end all of it. And in construction, it's more important than anything. I mean, it's about education and having the right people to do the job, to work for you, to represent you, to whether it be your contracts or having the right person buying the property, buying the land, whatever it may be. It's all about employing the right people, and the construction industry is based on it. And I mean, as Chris said, you've got apprenticeships. There's been a bit of a dip in potentially quality because people aren't being trained the way they used to be. But ultimately, it's all about making sure that the professional that you are employing is not just because they've got that title, they're able to achieve and deliver what you need them to achieve.
Well, Hamish, that was a bun fight, wasn't it? Would you care to take us home, please?
Well, we have seen the positives today. That's definitely the case. And interesting, it might be worth referring back to when Gareth and I, we were doing this podcast yesterday, and we were speaking with one of the team that works with me for IPSA, our organisation of personal search agents, because she originally worked in Land Charge's office. She's originally worked in a planning office. She has worked for a significant number of years in the council prior to even entering the field of looking into local authority.
Gatekeeper turned poacher, I think we call it.
And one of the things she did actually sort of say that the idea of building control somehow or other hasn't actually sort of reached the heights that it should have done, because it isn't building control at all. It's basically somebody put me along. She didn't quite say this, but we've known this from previous experience. So often building control is popping along for having a cup of coffee. I have dropped in. I have seen. And away we go. After they always make the announcement where they're coming in, they don't sort of just turn up when they choose to, just to make sure. And I think there is movement there as well. There is an awareness that things haven't been quite right. And when we actually sort of look at some of the properties which we'll be discussing tomorrow, it's because of those corners having been cut in the first place that remediation is having to be carried out quite significantly, which is impacting on an awful lot of other things. But it needs to be looked at early on. And I mean, it's great to see Michelle, by working with Chris, and it just reinforces what Michelle said again, you work with the right team, and what a significant difference that makes.
And I'm told reliably that having a half decent QS on board can make all the difference. And also keep your nose to the correct sort of grindstone, so you get the right things done at the right time with the right materials. Thank you so much, one and all. Of course, Chris Gilson of Route Home, Hamish McClare of Search Convey, and the guardian angel of construction herself, Michelle Carr of Construction Alchemy. It just remains for me to say to one and all, as we rush towards the weekend, try and keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and for goodness sake, look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.